The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped into the dimly lit bookstore. The scent of aged paper and dust wrapping around me like an old, forgotten memory. It was the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time. Narrow aisles, towering wooden shelves, sagging under the weight of books that hadn't been touched in decades. The faint glow of a few scattered lamps barely reached the corners, leaving shadows long and uncertain. I had passed by the store countless times, but had never noticed it before today. The sign outside was weathered, the name barely legible, Hollow and Company. Rare books. A storm had been brewing all evening, the sky heavy with thunderclouds, and this place had offered a welcome escape from the sudden downpour. Yet, as soon as I crossed the threshold, a strange stillness settled over me, as if the world outside had ceased to exist altogether. Behind an old wooden counter, a frail-looking man sat hunched over a ledger, his fingers gliding over the yellowed pages with deliberate slowness. His presence was so still, so quiet, that for a moment I wondered if he had even noticed me. But then, without lifting his head, he spoke. "You're looking for something, aren't you?" His voice was thin, almost papery, and it sent a strange shivers down my spine. I hadn't said a word since stepping inside. I hesitated before responding. "I just needed a place to wait out the rain," I said, trying to sound casual. The man finally looked up. His eyes were an unsettling shade of gray, like smoke trapped behind glass. He studied me for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Everything happens for a reason," he murmured, and then returned to his ledger, as if I no longer existed. I swallowed, suddenly feeling unwelcome. The shelves loomed around me, packed with books whose spines were faded beyond recognition. I ran my fingers along one at random, and the moment I touched it, a chill crawled up my arm. The book was ice cold. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow shifting between the shelves, just at the edge of my vision. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there, just rows upon rows of books staring back at me. And yet, something felt different. The air had changed. I wasn't alone. I shook off the uneasy feeling and stepped deeper into the maze of bookshelves, my fingers trailing absent-mindedly over the spines. The silence in the store was oppressive, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The sound of my own footsteps seemed muffled, swallowed by the thick air. A drop of water slid from my sleeve and hit the wooden floor with a soft tap, reminding me that outside the rain was still pouring. Yet, in here, it felt as if time had stopped. I turned a corner and found a narrow aisle, the shelves pressing in on both sides. Something about this section felt different. The books were older, their bindings cracked, the titles embossed in faded gold lettering. I reached for one, a thick volume with no title on its spine. But the moment my fingers brushed the cover, a whispery echo through the silence. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakably there. A voice. I jerked my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted around the aisle, searching for someone, anyone, but I was alone. I glanced toward the front of the store. The old man at the counter hadn't moved, his head still bent over his ledger. Maybe it was just my imagination. The quiet, the storm outside, the eerie atmosphere. It was playing tricks on me. I exhaled slowly and reached for the book again, determined not to let a silly whisper unnerve me. But as soon as my fingertips met the cover, the whisper came again. This time, clearer. "Don't." I yanked my hand away as if burned, my heart pounding. The sound hadn't come from behind me, nor from the counter. It had come from the bookshelf itself. A sudden gust of cold air rushed through the aisle, as though something had exhaled right next to my ear. The overhead lamp flickered, casting erratic shadows across the shelves. And then, a book, 3 shelves up, slid forward on its own. It teetered on the edge before dropping to the floor with a dull thud. I took a step back, every hair on my body standing on end. My pulse roared in my ears. I glanced toward the counter again. The old man still hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to the noise at all. Swallowing hard, I crouched and picked up the fallen book. The cover was dark leather, worn and peeling at the edges. No title, no author. But when I opened it, the pages inside were smooth and pristine, despite the book's ancient appearance. There was only a single line of text in the center of the first page, written in deep black ink. "You shouldn't be here." I slammed the book shut and nearly dropped it. My chest tightened, as if the walls were closing in. This had to be a prank. Some elaborate trick played by the shopkeeper to scare visitors. But as I turned to place the book back on the shelf, something moved at the edge of my vision. A figure. A shadow slipped between the shelves, too quick for me to get a clear look. My breath hitched. Someone else was here. I wasn't alone. "Hello?" My voice came out hoarse. The logical part of my brain told me it had to be another customer. But deep inside, I knew better. No answer. The air grew colder, the scent of old paper now tinged with something damp, almost rotten. I took a hesitant step forward, peering around the corner of the shelf where I had seen the shadow. Empty. Just books. Rows and rows of books. And then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, a slow, deliberate creak sounded behind me, like the weight of a foot pressing against an old wooden board. I turned, but no one was there. The book in my hands felt heavier. My fingers trembled against the worn leather cover. Then, ever so faintly, another whisper. "Leave." My fingers tightened around the book as my breath came in shallow gasps. The whisper had been unmistakable, urgent, almost pleading. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to turn around and walk out of the bookstore without looking back. But something rooted me to the spot. I forced myself to glance toward the counter. The old man still sat there, unmoving, as if he hadn't heard anything. The soft glow of his desk lamp barely reached beyond his hunched figure, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if he was even real at all. I turned my attention back to the book in my hands. The message on the first page still stared back at me, the ink dark and sharp. "You shouldn't be here." I hesitated, then flipped another page. Blank. I turned another. Still blank. I rifled through the entire book. Nothing. No more words, no markings, no signs that anyone had ever written in it. But just as I was about to close it, something changed. The pages shifted. I felt it move beneath my fingertips, as if the book was breathing. The edges darkened, ink bleeding into the paper as letters began to form before my eyes. The words unraveled like spiderweb cracks spreading across glass, curling into sentences in an elegant, old-fashioned script. "It's watching you." A sharp chill ran down my spine. My head snapped up, scanning the aisles. The dim lamps overhead flickered, their glow stretching the shadows into unnatural shapes. The air was thick with silence, yet I felt something else. A presence. I wasn't alone. A noise broke the stillness, a soft rustling, like fingertips brushing against pages. But it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from behind the shelves, deeper into the store. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My rational mind told me to turn around, to put the book back and leave. But some terrible, unshakable curiosity pushed me forward. My footsteps were slow, deliberate, as I moved toward the sound. The rows of bookshelves seemed to stretch endlessly, far longer than they should have in a store this small. The air grew denser, carrying the scent of something damp and decayed beneath the musty aroma of old paper. And then I saw it. A door. It was tucked away at the end of a narrow aisle, barely visible in the dim lighting. A small wooden door with no handle, no keyhole, just a dark surface that seemed almost wrong, as if it didn't belong to this place or to any place at all. The moment I saw it, the whisper returned, curling around my ears like cold breath. Turn back. But I didn't. I stepped closer, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. As I did, something shifted in the air. The lamps overhead flickered violently, casting jagged, moving shadows against the shelves. The temperature dropped so sharply that my breath misted in front of me. I reached out, hesitating just inches from the door. My fingertips tingled, the air buzzing with unseen energy. Then a sudden movement, a shadow passing under the door. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Someone, something, was on the other side. And then the whisper changed. It was no longer a warning, no longer distant. This time, it was right behind me. You shouldn't have come this far. A breath, cold, damp, and far too close, brushed against the back of my neck. My entire body went rigid. The whisper had been right behind me, but I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't felt anyone approach. It was as if something had just appeared. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so violently, I thought it might shake the walls around me. Nothing. The aisle behind me was empty, the bookshelves standing silent and undisturbed. But the air was wrong, thicker, heavier. It carried a scent now, something damp and rotting, like old wood left to decay in darkness. I wanted to run. Every nerve in my body told me to. But the door, its presence pulled at me, a silent, invisible force demanding attention. I turned back to it. A noise came from the other side. Not a whisper, not a rustling, a knock, soft where deliberate. 3 slow raps against the wood. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe the old man was playing a trick on me. Maybe someone else had entered the store without me noticing. But I knew I was alone. And then the door opened. Not all the way, just a sliver. But the darkness beyond it, it wasn't normal. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was something else entirely. A void, thick and swallowing, like the air had been sucked out of it. It was wrong, unnatural. And then, from the darkness, something moved. A hand, thin, gray, and impossibly long fingers curled around the edge of the door. The nails were cracked, jagged, and as it gripped the wood, I heard it. A slow, deliberate scratching. My body locked up, unable to move. The hand slid forward, revealing more of the arm. Too long, too thin. The skin stretched tight over bones. And then, a face. Or what should have been a face. It was pale, featureless except for deep hollow sockets where eyes should have been. The mouth, if it was a mouth, was nothing more than a jagged slit pulled into something that could have been a grin, but held none of the warmth of one. It didn't move like a person. It crawled, emerging from the darkness in unnatural, jerking motions. its limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. Then the whisper came again. But this time, it wasn't from behind me. It wasn't in my ear. It came from inside me. You let it in. The book, still clutched in my shaking hands, burned ice cold. I looked down and saw the ink shifting across the pages, rearranging itself. The words bled together, forming something new. It knows your name. I dropped the book. The thing in the doorway twitched. It turned its head, the hollow sockets locking onto me. It knew. It had been waiting. And then it took a step forward. My legs refused to move. The thing in the doorway had stepped forward, its body jerking in unnatural twitching motions. The air around it was wrong. Thick, heavy, vibrating with something I couldn't understand. The whisper was inside me now, curling around my thoughts, slipping into the spaces between my breath. Run. Something in me snapped. I turned and bolted. The bookshelves blurred past me as I sprinted through the narrow aisles, my footsteps pounding against the creaking wooden floor. The shop felt different now. Endless, like the rows of bookshelves stretched on forever, shifting, rearranging themselves as I ran. No matter which way I turned, the front of the store never got any closer. Behind me, the sound of something moving, fast, not footsteps, scraping, a dry, dragging noise, as if something was crawling, no slithering, across the floor. I didn't dare look back. I burst into another aisle, gripping the shelves for balance as I skidded to a stop. My heart jackhammered in my chest. I had to get out, had to find the exit. But the store wasn't letting me. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. The thing was closer now, moving in quick, unnatural bursts, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. Its hollow sockets were locked onto me. It opened its mouth, the jagged, two wide slits stretching impossibly far, and let out a sound that made my skin prickle with icy dread. A whisper, but not like before. This one was layered, as if 1,000 voices were speaking at once. All of them wrong, all of them hungry. Stay. I stumbled back, gasping. My foot knocked into something. The book. It had followed me. It lay open, pages fluttering, as though caught in an unseen wind. Words bled across the paper in frantic, shifting ink. You can't leave unless it chooses to let you go. Number no? I couldn't accept that. There had to be a way out. I seized the book with shaking hands and flipped through the pages, searching for what I didn't know. But the text was shifting, warping, dissolving the moment my eyes tried to focus on it. A guttural, wet sound filled the space around me. The thing was closer now, almost beside me. I risked a glance. It was no longer fully human-shaped. Its limbs had elongated further, bending in ways that defied reality. Its skin had darkened, pulsing with something beneath the surface. It was changing, becoming something worse. The store trembled. The bookshelves groaned, the wooden floor beneath me shuddering like it was alive. And then the book stopped moving. The ink settled. A single line of text remained, bold, unwavering. Give it a name or become part of the story. My pulse stilled. Give it a name. I didn't understand. I didn't have time to understand. The thing lunged. Instinct took over. I shouted the first name that came to mind. Something random, something meaningless. Edwin. The moment the word left my lips, the creature froze. The whispering stopped. The air stilled. For a single suffocating second, everything was silent. Then the creature screamed. It was an inhuman, ear-splitting wail, like the sound of tearing paper, mixed with something ancient and wrong. The shadows around it convulsed. Its body twisted violently. The name I had spoken, burning itself into its form, branding it. The store rippled, the bookshelves bent, warping, as if reality itself was unraveling. And then, darkness. The next thing I knew, I was outside. The cold rain slammed against my skin, the neon streetlights flickering in the wet pavement. I spun around, my chest heaving. The bookstore was gone. The space where it had been was empty. Nothing but a blank, rain-soaked alley. No sign of the wooden door, the old man, or the endless rows of books, but in my hands, the book remained. Its leather cover was warm now, pulsing faintly. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around it. The ink on the first page had shifted one last time. It knows its name now, but so do you. The rain poured harder, the shadows around me shifted, and somewhere, too far, yet too close, something whispered my name.